This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Thanks, Squarespace. Dogs. Now, you clearly know the month you were born in, but do you really know it? Well, by the end of this video, you will. We're going to explore where the names for our months come from and what they've been called in the past. Find out if you were born in the month of milk or the month of blood, the month of weeds or the month of mud. Learn what Roman gods gave us these months and what Roman mathematics gave us these ones. Prepare to have your understanding of our calendar turned upside down in this and other Rob words. So where to begin? Well, if we're going to tour the months of the year, there is one obvious place to start, although there is a very good argument for beginning in March. All will become clear later. But let's play it straight and kick off with January. We get the name January from the Romans, who named the month after their god Janus, who was the god of beginnings. How convenient. But of course, it isn't just convenient, it's entirely intentional. Believe it or not, January was not always the first month of the year, hence my little quandary about where to start with this video. But one of the reasons it was moved to the front page of the calendar in 153 BC was the association between Janus and getting off to a good start. Plus his two faces meant he could stare back at the year just past and stare forward at the 12 months to come. Janus was also the god of endings and the god of doorways. There were ceremonial gateways around ancient Rome through which the armies would march off to battle and then hopefully return. And they were named after Janus. Back to the calendar though, and specifically to the English language. Now in Old English, which was being spoken 1,000 years ago, the first month of the year was known as Januarius Monath, which is just the Latin word for January with the Anglo-Saxon monath slapped on the end. Monath actually meant moon because a month was considered to be the period between one new moon and the next, and monath also became our word month. But the Anglo-Saxons also had their own name for January, or at least a period that roughly aligns with it. The Old English aftera Yeola, after Yule, or the second month of what we've come to know as Yule. Yule was a pre-Christian festival around the end of the year, which we believe for the Anglo-Saxons was the 25th of December, and also around the winter solstice. After Yule was worth marking because it meant the days were finally getting longer. Neo-pagans still celebrate Yule. Elsewhere, the word is sometimes used to refer to Christmas as well. We still occasionally call that period Yuletide. Tide being an early English word for time. Think of Zeit in German or tide in Dutch. We'll come back to Yule a little bit later on, but before that, let's move on to our second month, February. The Romans gave us this name too. It comes from their god Februus, who was celebrated during this month. Februus was the god associated with death and purification, which came together grimly really in the sacrifices that were made during his festival, Februalia. Now, if January wasn't always the first month, then it stands to reason that February can't have always been the second, right? And that's true. For a period, it was actually the last month of the Roman calendar. January and February were, for a time, considered so-called dark months by the Romans. In fact, for a while, they didn't even bother to name them. Nothing could be achieved at this miserable terminus to the year. It was too cold to fight or to farm or to head out on your travels. It was just this barren blank spot on the calendar. But that would eventually change. It was in around 700 BC that the second king of Rome, Numa Pompilius, supposedly rescued January and February from the dark depths of the end of the year and gave them the ultimate upgrade, making them the first months of the year. Again, Old English took on the Roman name for the month with Februarius Monath. There's that word for month again at the end. But according to the Venerable Bede, the English monk and scribe who is the sole source for much of our knowledge of Old English, February was also known to the Anglo-Saxons as Solmånath. Now, there is a bit of a dispute over what the sol bit means here. Some say it's a reference to the sun, but have you ever been to Northern Europe in February? Seems unlikely to me. To me, the more likely explanation is that it shares a root with our word soil, and February was actually the muddy month. Bede reckoned it was something to do with cakes, but I think he might just have been hungry from all of the scribing and monking. Okay, let's quick march into March and to what was for the Romans for several hundreds of years the first month of the year, until it was knocked off its perch by January and February. I can imagine that the Roman god of war, Mars, was absolutely livid to see the month named after him bumped down to third place. March, or Martius to the Romans, was the month when offerings were made to Mars ahead of the military campaigning season. Old English had a few extra names for the month of March too. One of them was Hlida, or later Lyde. Lyde shares its root with our word loud, because it was the month noisy with wind and storm. Another vote of confidence in the British weather there. The Anglo-Saxons also had another name for March that a bit better fits with the militaristic name given by the Romans. They named it after what we believe was a pre-Christian goddess, Hretha, who was associated with glory. Our next month throws up all kinds of surprises. It's predictably April. But first, I want to just shout out this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace empowers individuals to create their online web presence and launch their passion project. They make building your own website really simple. Their excellent blogging tools enable you to easily share videos and social media posts, for example. I've got my tweets up there. There are also lots of cool ways to improve the look of your site, and then find out how many people have visited it and from where. Another cool thing is that Squarespace will even help you to make yourself some extra money by setting up an online shop. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you are ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/robwords to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Oh goody, the builders have just fired up. I'm going to move. Don't forget my calendar. Okay, back to our meander through the calendar months and straight back in with April. This is another name given to us by the Romans, who called it Aprilis. However, where they got that name from is actually up in the air. One of the theories goes that it ultimately derives from the Greek goddess Aphrodite. Her Roman equivalent actually was Venus, so its position next to Mars in the calendar does make this an elegant explanation, but we're not sure about it. Another elegant but probably inaccurate explanation is that Aprilis derives from the Latin verb aperire, meaning to open. After all, this pleasant spring month is the time when flowers open up and reveal their beauty to the world. This would give it the same etymological root as the words aperitif, for example, a lovely drink to open up your evening meal, and aperture, which is obviously an opening. It's a nice explanation, but yeah, a lot of people, clever people, think it's nonsense. Anyway, once again, the Anglo-Saxons took on the Latin name for the month, but they also had their own that more or less coincided with it. Eastermornath. That's right, it's Easter month. It's obviously not named after the Christian festival of Easter, because this is a pre-Christian term. If anything, it's the other way around. In English, Easter has the name that it has because it falls in the pagan Eastermornath, Easter month. Now, Easter month appears to get its name from the Germanic goddess of spring, Easter, or Eostra, or Ostara, or Iastro. She went by many names to many different Germanic peoples, and we believe that the Anglo-Saxons believed in her as well. On to our next month now. May I introduce you to May? Let's rattle through the Latin origin of this one, because the best bit comes with the Anglo-Saxon name for this month. May is named after the Roman goddess Maia, or Maya, a fertility goddess who oversaw the growth of plants, appropriate for this springtime month, right? But Maya is not to be confused with the Greek goddess of the same name, the lover of Zeus and mother of Hermes. So that's the Latin bit, but straight on to the other name for May in Old English, which was three milky monath, literally 3 milk month. Hold on to your udders, I'll let our pal Bede explain why. In 725 AD, he wrote that the 5th month is called 3 milky in our language because before there was such abundance in Britain and also in Germania, whence the Angle people came to Britain, they would milk their cows thrice a day. So basically the longer days and lush pastures meant you could give dear old Daisy a good old milking 3 times every day during May. This fact delighted the Angles so much it would appear that they named the entire month after it. That's May. Do you know what's coming next? June. And indeed, June is most widely thought to be named after the Roman deity Juno. She was the Romans' chief goddess and their goddess of women and marriage. One classic Juno anecdote is that she flew into a jealous rage when her husband gave birth to Minerva from his own head. So you think your family has problems? There is also a theory that June gets its name from the same root as juniors, as in the young ones, which could make sense following swiftly on the heels of spring with all of the new life bounding around. Again, Old English had an alternative name for June, according to Bede. June was the first month of a 2-month period known as Lithe or Lether. Lithe was midsummer, when gentle weather provided the perfect conditions for travelling. The first month of Lithe, i.e. June, was called by the Anglo-Saxons Ara Lether. Ara has the same root as our modern words early and the rather old-fashioned air, so Ara Lether was early Lether. For what came next, stick around. Our next month is, of course, July. I say of course, but actually by Roman standards, July is a relatively new name for it. The month was named after Emperor Julius Caesar after his death in 44 BC. It was the month in which he was born. But what were the Romans calling it before that, then? Well, they were calling it quintilis. You might recognise the start of that word from other words, like, for example, quintuplets. A woman who gives birth to quintuplets gives birth to 5 babies. Ouch. And quintilis literally meant 5th, because it was at one point the 5th month in the Roman calendar, back when March was the first month and the dark months that became January and February were down at the other end. Quintilis kicks off a pattern that we'll see with the rest of the months. Meanwhile, to pick up on a thread from June, we talked about the Anglo-Saxons calling June Ara Lether, early Lithe. Well, the second month of Lithe, July, was known as Aftera Lether, after Lithe, or second Lithe. I love these old English month names. And do you know who else did? J.R.R. Tolkien. He resurrected a lot of them, including after Lithe, when he published the Hobbit's Shire calendar in the 3rd book of his Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Return of the King. He also used after Yule and Solmath, which are basically what the Anglo-Saxon names would have been by around about now if we'd kept them, because you know how English develops. Anyway, next on to that most august of months, August. Aww. August shares a similar story with July. August was not the first name that the Romans gave to that month. I mentioned how quintilis began a sequence that continued for the rest of the year, and so it did. The Romans were originally calling August, see if you can guess it, Sextilis, which meant 6th. It was renamed after Augustus Caesar during his reign in 8 BC. Why that month of all months? Well, supposedly because of a lot of events significant to his rise to power happening during Sextilis, including the fall of Alexandria on what became the 1st of August. Another pattern that you're probably spotting is that the Anglo-Saxons had an alternative name for everything, as well they might. In the case of August, it was the rather inauspicious sounding Weord Monath, weed month. This was the time of the year when the fields would become overrun with little plants. Conditions were perfect for weeds. Incidentally, I did check for you. US National Cannabis Awareness Month is in April, not August. An opportunity missed, in my opinion. Now I'm going to group the next and final 4 months together, and you've perhaps worked out why that is by now. September, October, November and December all get their names from where they originally sat in the Roman calendar. September was the 7th month, from septem in Latin, meaning 7. October was the 8th, think of octopus and octagon. November was the 9th month, and December was the 10th. Simple, right? Not so simple were the alternative names in Old English, with the periods roughly equating to those 4 months. September was variously known as Harfest Mornath, the harvest month for obvious reasons, and Harley Mornath, which meant holy month, although I've almost certainly pronounced it wrongly. Why so holy? Well, Bede says it's because this was the time for pre-Christian offerings to the gods, presumably in the hope of securing a nice hefty harvest. October was known to the Anglo-Saxons as Winterfylleth because it was the month of the full moon that heralded the start of winter. I like that one, a bit better than Weed Month anyway. Although even Weed Month seems genteel in the face of our next one. November was known as Blotmornath, sacrifice month. According to the Venerable Bede, this was a time for slaughter of cattle. Herds were traditionally sent to meet their maker/makers during November, with some of them being killed as offerings to the gods. Some sources also have November down as Blodmornath, which would be the equally morbid blood month. I think I prefer November. And on to December, which I gave you a major clue to earlier. I talked about the pagan festival of Yule, which fell during the last month of the year, and we heard about how the month afterwards, January, was known in Old English as after Yule or after Yeola. Can you guess what December was known as then? It was Ara Yeola or pre-Yule, a bit like June, the first month of Lythe, was Ara Litha. December was also sometimes known simply as Yule Mornath, Yule month. And there we are, we've come full circle. Up next, are not Undecember and Duodecember, as the Romans might have called them, but January and February, once the final 2 months of the year, but for the last 2,175 cycles or so, the first 2. If you've enjoyed this, I think you'll really enjoy my look at where we get our names for colours from too, or indeed my deep dive into the influence of the Vikings on English. Thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you over in the next one, yeah? That's your lot.